Oh, look at that. Matt
Wow.
Curry. Wow.
What's up, dudes? You're up late. That's my MO these days.
Who drank some champagne this week?
Not
I see
I.
you're rocking Diet Coke. I'm drinking pure water. The finest water.
What do you
British,
have back there, Matt? Do you have, over your shoulder, you got something? Over my shoulder, I got a wine rack. Okay, yeah, that's what it is.
so there's a lot going on this week. Let's see what we see out there. There was ContainerCon, LinuxCon. We had Sam Ramsey give a talk. Pretty good. Cloud Foundry Foundation. What else was going on? The Mesos guys had a big thing that was pretty interesting to watch. They had their conference. We announced we changed like the whole thing about Pivotal. It's kind of interesting. And then the Cloud Foundry, Pivotal Cloud Foundry product revenue kind of came out of that too in the write-up. So it's a wild ride.
Yes.
So I think some of us are always around, but some of us are new. So as always, and you might not recognize me with my hair, but I'm Andrew. And tomorrow is Bridget's first day as a Pivotal employee. So she's been on Cloud Foundry After Dark before, but never as a Pivotal employee.
Super excited. And I guess it's not technically after midnight Sunday Pacific time, so it's not even my first day yet. Tomorrow.
Well, we'll count your time. We'll count your clock.
Well, if it's Central Time, I'm up way past my bedtime. So let's just pretend that I'm totally acclimated to Pacific Time, even though I flew in today.
And then someone else that I don't think most people here know, at least not yet, is someone I've known for a long time is Jason, he's also a new Pivotal employee.
I am. I actually kind of got leached into the system long before my start date. But I think my official start date was 10 days ago, possibly 12 days ago. I'm not actually sure myself, like when I officially started getting paid. But yeah, been on since pretty much the beginning of the month.
Where are you at right now?
Right now I'm at home, so I am dialing in from Thailand. But I've been pretty much living on airplanes since I joined the crew, and kind of expect to be living on airplanes.
What do you think of Cloud Foundry?
Give me some scope. What do I think of it just in general as a product, or what do I think of it as it pertains to the market out in APJ? That's another data point. I'm in Asia, so the experiences that I see customers having with it are probably going to be wildly different than a lot of the other people on the call. So how are we scoping this? I mean, what do I think of it in general?
It's choose your own adventure, Jason.
All right. So in general, I think that I think that it's pretty much the way to go for any company that actually wants to move forward in a cloud way, that where the business value is really at their focus. I mean, there's been a lot of companies that I've worked with over the last 4 years that have kind of went down this CIO mandated cloud checkbox that they needed to deliver on, and their dev team had their hypervisors and all of their scripts that hit the API of those hypervisors, and they got their compute or their storage or network or whatever according to their scripts, and then they went through and blew a year plus in a sizable amount of budget and went through this whole exercise of getting any flavor of infrastructure as a service stood up. And when it was all over and everybody was beaten down, they kind of had a less stable version for the end developer experience than what they had in the beginning. And it seems like that with Cloud Foundry, you're kind of abstracting away from all of that, and you're really giving the end developer kind of what the goal was intended to be in the beginning before it got side-railed into something that just kind of confused it all.
It's almost like building a great platform is not super easy.
Yeah, surprising, huh? No, I mean I think it's nice that anytime there's a certain level of things being prescriptive, it makes it easier just to conform to a direction that is known to be successful, and then that basically paves a path forward. And I think that really a lot of engineering teams that are building apps, especially out here, that's really what companies need. I mean, as soon as they go, they start to tread off down a do-it-yourself path, it seems like if they're lucky, they end up with something that works as good as what we have out of the box. And that's going to be at significantly greater costs and time. So.
And don't forget you have to actually hire and attract and retain people who can build and operate this platform for
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the values of the standards are on all sides.
So for the people who know a little bit about me but don't know Jason was riding shotgun on all the cloud scaling work that happened in Asia and Korea back in the day.
And then I'm kind of like one of those POW cases that just never came home from Korea. Like I got lost somehow. I don't know what happened, but everybody else ended up back in the U.S. and I was just running around Korea for the next 2 years looking for the helicopter. So.
It was fun while it lasted.
Oh yeah, it was great.
You got pretty addicted to K-dramas, huh?
Well. I mean, it's relative, I guess. I'm possibly more addicted to that. That was
Bridget's job. Bridget's job like 2 weeks ago was to be like the Netflix of Korean dramas in the U.S.
Okay, so I've seen some things on television that to this day I still am digesting.
We're having a party. Yeah. We got London, we got Asia, we got everyone.
Hello.
Are you inside of a jet engine?
Audio problems. I'll come back.
So I don't get to see Matt Curry too often. I'm wondering what's on his mind up at 1 a.m.
Not much, just hanging out, and wanted to drop in and see what was going on.
Well, I'm excited about some of the stuff that's going on over there. I don't know what you guys are super public about, but I saw you guys. It's like you made branding for your internal transformation.
Yeah, it's branded as Composed, and we've got a Twitter account and stuff, and I think it's been good to have a name to kind of assign to that whole line of work, and yeah, we're pretty jacked up about it. We got some cool stuff coming, and hopefully we'll be able to be more public about it than we've been going forward. But we're trying to figure out, kind of how to carry that out into the public realm. We have some interesting challenges there. It's not something that a big company like Allstate is used to dealing with, really.
What do you mean exactly?
Like, can you trademark something that's not providing services externally? Like stuff like that, like weird, weird legal stuff, and just so what, like, how much should it be associated with the corporate brand versus should not, and what are our objectives? We're still kind of trying to figure all that out, because we want to, it needs to be tied to Allstate to some degree, because it's really important that people understand that it's backed by, the larger company, but to some degree we're also trying to set ourselves apart from what people might think of as a typical insurance company. So like when we go on recruiting efforts for college campuses and stuff, a lot of times, software engineering students will ask us, are you trying to convert me into like a agent who sells insurance? Because that's not really what I want to do. And so we're really trying to build a brand around the software and technology engineering side of Allstate, and drive awareness into the community around some of the cool stuff we're doing in that space.
It's almost like it's this big socio-technical experiment that you're doing, that we're all actually doing.
Yes, it is. Hopefully the experiment works.
I think we all have different challenges here, but me and James Baer were just talking about how hard it is to recruit right now, and I'm sure it's even harder for you than it probably is for us right now.
Yeah, it's ridiculously hard. I think we've got a couple guys that have recently joined that are fresh hires that I think are spending time over at Pivotal over the next few weeks, which is going to be cool to partner on that and have them experience kind of the culture and some of the stuff we're working on together. But definitely finding more senior people has been tough. It's been really challenging. I mean, the market right now is really, really hot. People are really particular, and it's just been finding the people that we want, the qualified people that we want. I mean, we've become a lot more discerning, I think, than maybe we would have been in the past. So finding those folks has been difficult for sure.
So Matt, question. I was just curious, how do you, when you're battling a perception of what Allstate is like how do you attract those senior people and convince them that they'll be interested in what you're offering?
So we've actually set up separate environments that we're branding like labs, very much similar to the Pivotal labs, some of the co-sponsored work we've done there. We've partnered with Pivotal in some of the IoT stuff, so I think we're going to be presenting at Spring 1 and getting more involved in the conference scene. At least in Arizona, we're co-sponsored founders of the Cloud Foundry meetup here locally. So just being more thoughtful about getting plugged into the community, being more public about some of the stuff we're doing. We've done a bunch of pull requests against some of the log search stuff, so the BOSH stuff related to elk as well, and they've been tweeting some of that stuff out. So it's more just really about creating and building a brand and building awareness around that that's technology specific rather than insurance specific. So hopefully, like I said, hopefully it works, but I think we're getting good traction. I mean, some of the younger guys that we've gotten are definitely super jacked up about what we're trying to do. Some of the more senior guys, a lot of them are excited, but not quite at the skill level that we're looking for. And then we've got other folks who we've just had trouble finding really good talent. But I'm here, we're hiring, so I get free publicity just by coming on here and hanging out with you guys.
Where are you located, or do you relocate people?
We do relocation. Right now, I've got a couple spots open in Tempe, Arizona, and our primary location is in the Chicago area, Northbrook, Illinois. And we've also got we're going to be doing some work in Charlotte and then Belfast, Ireland as well.
So do you have a presence? Do you have a presence at DevOps Days Chicago for the next few days?
We do. We have at least 2 people I know of that are going, and I think probably a couple more. So yeah, it's going to be good. We're excited. We're not presenting, but we have people that are attending.
Okay, so pro tip, if you want your people who are attending but not presenting to get a chance to have your message be heard, make sure to tell them to propose an open space discussion.
Okay.
That gives them a chance to go up with the mic in front of the entire room of people and say, hey, it would be cool to talk about insert cool topic here. I'm with such and such a company, but love to talk to any small group, an impromptu breakout group of people who would like to talk about this. Nice. And then they get the chance to kind of have people understand that they're interested in talking about this, and then it's not a pitch, it's just let's talk about whatever this cool thing is that maybe you're working on. And then they get a group of people who are interested in it, who want to talk to them. Very fertile ground for recruiting. So
have you ever been to a DevOps Days or an open space before?
I haven't, no. It's been on my list, but I haven't been out there yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, we need to fix that for you. You were going to ask a question before, James, or?
Well, yeah, I was just saying that I think just hearing the litany of things that you're doing, Matt, it just seems like it's that just getting it out there, like all the stuff you're doing, whether it's at the conferences or knowing that there's demonstrated pull requests with interesting technologies and setting up the meetups. You're just doing the hard work, and just by having an authentic presence in the community, you're probably going to find that bears fruit. Seems like very reasonable to me that's going to work out for you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been our strategy for now, and I think we're going to continue in that direction, and unless it doesn't appear that it's working out. But certainly, from my experience in the tech community, it seems like that level of authenticity and just kind of putting yourself out there and contributing is the best way to get help back. And I love it. It's we're very privileged in this industry that we have a really, really healthy community. And people are really.
I'm curious because you came from a little bit of a Silicon Valley style background into a place like Allstate. How do you find they receive this idea that it's like we should share all this stuff, we should be more open to doing when they might have kind of these instincts and reflexes for decades that are kind of in the opposite direction.
It's been different. I think most people are actually on. We have at least pockets of people in all different departments that are looking to help. I think a lot. We have support at kind of the highest levels, and everybody realizes that this is a huge challenge. So I think we have the support that we need. Although it's not like it's something that we can turn around overnight. It definitely requires discussions and kind of building shared understanding about what we're trying to do and why. But so far, we've made progress. I mean, I've only been at Allstate since March, and we didn't even have a GitHub account. And so now, we've got code that's out in the public. Given that none of it's our own projects yet that have been sourced, but we're submitting pull requests and we got CLA signed for stuff, and so all of that is moving forward. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely been tougher than starting your own startup or being a part of a company that's already contributing large pieces of work out into the public. But I feel pretty good about how far we've come and the momentum we're gaining.
Interesting. Did anyone see anything coming out of the ContainerCon stuff or LinuxCon stuff that was exciting? Did anyone know that happened?
Yes, I saw that happened. I saw it looked. I mean, I just saw this coverage on Twitter, but it looked like Sam Ramji. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's right.
I had some interesting things to say there that were maybe a little bit different than some of the stuff he was saying at OSCON. Like, do you feel like that is pretty much just talking about like the platform is starting to sink in? Like, people are starting to hear that, or what do you think?
I don't know. You have to be more specific. I'm not sure what what's the nuance there.
I'm trying to remember exactly what it was he said that struck me as interesting, but I think it was something along the lines of, talking about like what you've been saying about how you have, you do have and need a platform of some sort, but then also talking about where Cloud Foundry plugs into that. It kind of seemed like the message has maybe evolved a little bit since what he was saying at OSCON.
Yeah, he got a lot of feedback from me on some of it to try to get a little bit of structure. Or like incorporate this idea of like the structured platform more strongly, more opinionated. And I feel like the landscape right now is really kind of bifurcating, where what Cloud Foundry is trying to give you is a much more complete vision, much more opinionated versus like kind of like a little component that is less opinionated that you can sort of integrate however you want. And this also came out in the in the Gartner panel I was just on with Apprenda and Red Hat, and they were both. We kind of started off with the question of what are these platforms best for, and I sort of take the position that these platforms are best for cloud native applications, for a variety of reasons. And they were kind of talking about, oh well, you don't want to leave the legacy, and like you have to do all this stuff, and you have to accommodate all this stuff, and it's like, okay, well, a lot of that stuff you could bring onto the platform. It will work. You're probably not going to be any worse off than it would be, but you're not really taking full advantage of the learnings of all these things that had to be learned the hard way, kind of building the big web. Where if you're just trying to do ad hoc automation, right, like just as a mental exercise, anytime you're doing something that is learning or knowing about the infrastructure or has some sort of state-dependent, order-dependent thing to get it set up, then you're basically baking in, like and I've done all this stuff myself, right? Like I built these platforms with Chef and Puppet and scripts and all the rest of it. And it's like you have to do this thing.
I've built them with Docker.
Yeah, so like this thing has to happen, and then this thing has to happen, and then this thing has to happen, and if anything's wrong in that order, it's like you got to start over and then redo it, right? And that's what that creates when you have a lot of order state-dependent automation is you've now sort of set a lower bound for how fast you can recover, right? So there's a bunch of things that when someone says to me, how do you do this one thing that's got like a bunch of ordered state-dependent steps in it, I just say I won't help you. I won't do that anymore. Right? And it's not that you can't do that, and there's a bunch of tools that you can do that, but if your goal is actually to drive down the mean time to recover, then you look for patterns that have these predictable failure and scaling characteristics that allow you to have the benefits. And so when you look at what's going on with the platforms evolving, is you have these what I call contracts. And the contracts allow the promises of the platform to actually be kept, right? So if I don't have a contract and I just want you to do whatever sort of ad hoc automation on top of the platform, then the platform can't actually keep any promise, and you're sort of on your own to will do whatever it takes to kind of put things back together when they break. And so I think those contracts will evolve. And I think that the most famous example of these contracts is the 12-factor application. That's sort of a marketing document that Heroku put out there, and that marketing document really represents a platform contract. And if you think about those points, and I don't have all of them memorized, but I can probably give you 10 if I sat and thought about it. It's like it has to write to like this data service, right? Well, if you have a contract where your app has to write to the data service, there better be that other side of that thing, right? So everyone's talking about 12-factor apps, and out of the box right now, I think Cloud Foundry does a pretty good job of giving you 12-factor ops, right? And those will evolve as you get there's a lot of experimentation going on in our community. There's also a lot of experimentation going on in these other communities around things like container-to-container networking, mounting volumes from containers, doing different things with service discovery, and I think that those contracts evolve over the next, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. But there's a high value to actually constraining things in a way that you can get the benefit. So I think that the perfect example, or a perfect example, is actually Amazon itself, right? Because when Amazon first came out, all you heard, and especially when they first came out, they only had like three different sizes of images, right? Or sizes for the VMs, and people are like, oh, I can never build anything with that, right? Like people couldn't make sense of it, and then that's evolved a bit now where you have a little more flexibility, but it's still relatively constrained than if you're used to kind of going through, your Dell or HP checklist to put together a machine, and so the idea about what these constraints are in terms of liberating your trade-off is you have constraints, but in return you're going to have the ability to keep promises with the platform, plus self-service access, role-based access, like all these other things that you just get for free out of the box. Colin made it back.
Now, it was interesting when I think I heard you
I
say.
can't hear him at all. Sorry.
Andrew, I thought I heard you say 12-factor app and then 12-factor ops. Do you think
That's what I did say.
Okay, so do you think that it's is there a challenge there then in trying to get the application developers to agree to all of the constraints? Like, you're going to log this way. I mean, I know, like, I've been in situations for sure where, like, we say, oh, you should log like this, and maybe the developer doesn't want to log like that. Like, is that the sort of conversations that are starting to happen within people, within organizations that are trying to use these kind of platforms?
Well, I'm probably a little bit, I like to play a little rough, but I'd be like, that's great, you're fired, whatever. Like, you don't want to log that way? Like, go work somewhere else.
I mean, I think also the evolution of a lot of these constraints is coming out of a space where people have already experimented with the other paths out there. I mean, people are familiar with the M collective. They're familiar with Ops Code Agent whenever that was around, and people were trying to get a message bus wired up to a Chef client, and you have a lot of those paths that all ultimately kind of hit the same problems. So a lot of the contracts that I think people are speaking about today are really born out of the the issues that, regardless of what configuration management framework you went with or what implementation you chose, people kind of hit the same groupings of the same problems. And they kind of realize that, if you have some type of prescriptive nature in the way that you're building the applications on top of it, a lot of that can go away.
I think that the key here for adoption and getting people on board is like enabling constraints, right? If constraints are only constraints, they're not enabling constraints, then you don't get any value from it, right? What you have to do is make doing the right thing the easy thing, and then people will just do it, and they'll quickly get over the hump of like all these other things that they wanted to do, because now they're so much more productive with those enabling constraints. And I think just to kind of put like a little bit of a concrete, certainly analogies break down under scrutiny, but if you look at something like Twitter, right? Twitter has constraints, but the constraints are actually a feature, right? Like, I can only write 140 characters, and it's like I could write a lot of stuff in 140 characters, and I make it super easy to do a bunch of things, and I get all these other kind of like side effects, network effects from those constraints, but it's definitely a constrained platform, right? By design, it's a constrained platform, and that's sort of where the other thing that I made, going back to the Gartner panel, I made the point that what I feel like the opportunity here is to move to a new paradigm, right? Like, there's a bunch of old IT stuff, there's a bunch of old technology, there's a bunch of old mindsets, and we're moving into a new world, and right now, kind of that umbrella native, but the opportunity here for Cloud Foundry representatives is not, I'm not here to be I'm here to take your order and like bring you something off a menu. I'm a doctor. I'm a personal trainer. I'm trying to make you healthy. I'm trying to make you right. I'm not trying to make you like, I'm not trying to bring you like 5 desserts because that's what you wanted to eat.
I'm not sure if I need to go on the defensive now. I like my dessert, Andrew. I really do.
Yeah, I'll bring.
I could have like a 12-inch cheesecake sitting right there.
How can you eat your pudding if you don't eat your meat, Jason? That's all.
Yeah, well, it's just we're back to prioritizing on order again. We've come full circle.
Colin, can you speak over there in the UK?
I don't know. Can I speak over here in the UK? I was in a jet engine, then I was not in a jet engine.
It sounds awesome.
Awesome, amazing. Yeah, this is my amazing Linux desktop that the fantastic Mr. Bayer has had the great pleasure of trying to use in front of a conference audience at the last CF Summit. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Colin Humphreys. I'm the CEO of Cloud Credo. I'm based in London, so it's 7:30 in the morning, so I'm nowhere near as awake as the rest of you. But yeah, for those of you I haven't met, nice to meet you. And hello to the wider Cloud Foundry After Dark audience.
I heard a rumor you guys are going to do some training at the summits that are coming up.
That is true. So we've got 3 tracks that we're doing. We're doing Cloud Foundry for beginners, so from 0 to hero. That's going to be great. We're doing an operations track, so BOSH focused, which is going to be really, really good. And we're doing a cloud native track for developers that want to move towards kind of cloud native 12-factor apps. So 3 separate tracks. All of them are going to be good. I'm delivering none of them, which is going to make them particularly good. You know, the fantastic other people at Cloud Credo are doing that. So we've got 2 engineers delivering each track. It's going to be awesome. So if you're available to come to Berlin, want to do a day of training before the summit, please do sign up.
Tell me a little more about the cloud native track. Like, what you know, are you using particular languages and frameworks to talk about that? Are you talking about aspects of services that and apps and how they play together? Like, what's you know, is it building an app? What is it?
It's well, I'm not personally delivering it, but I'll do my very best to put this across. It's essentially application evolution. It's going to have a little bit of a Java focus, so we are going to be touching on the Spring Cloud OSS stuff, a little bit of the Netflix components, but it's also, I say, about 12 factors. How do you decompose an application? How do you right size your microservices? Those kind of things. So how do you take an application that perhaps has been delivered 3-tier before, and how do you drive that into something that's cloud native, that's, you know, scalable, that's resilient, that has all the kind of properties and patterns that we'd look for in a modern application?
Cool.
Sign me up.
Did you guys see that?
By which Andrew literally means send him to Berlin? Because that would be awesome.
What are you
going to Berlin, Andrew?
I got to figure out my travel schedule and how much I can travel and stay married.
You and me both, buddy.
Yeah, I'm not too far off of that. But we have excellent sushi in Singapore.
Well, there's actually
there's a Chinese DevOps days.
Too. There's a Chinese summit as well coming up. That's a little closer to you. So,
yeah,
so Colin,
Shanghai is going to be, I think, early December. There's kind of a little bit of movement on that. So Berlin is November the 2nd and 3rd. We're also going to have a little unconference on the day before. So I think that's the 1st of November, which will be in the same conference hotel. So there'll be an unconference there, which is being jointly run by the London PaaS user group. We're just jumping over to Berlin, and also by the German and Swiss user groups as well. So we're all kind of collaborating. We're doing an unconference there that's going to be a lot of fun, a chance to shout about Cloud Foundry, and then the subsequent 2 days of the summit. So as you say, Shanghai is going to be, I think, December, but
it's about a month
later.
Foundation. I can't remember the exact date. About a month later.
And we're hoping to do the same 3 tracks of training: the beginners, developers, operators, training in Shanghai as well. So we'll see how that works out.
So I've been trying to get you on Cloud Foundry After Dark for a while, Colin, but you always make this excuse that you're on site with the customer.
Yeah, we both know that's not true. Well, obviously you have been asking me, but obviously I haven't been on site with the customer. I've just been in bed.
That's the truth.
It's 7 a.m. here.
Well, what I was going to ask you, because you say you had to meet someone like at 8 o'clock or whatever. Maybe that's a lie. I don't know. But I was just curious what your perception is like, you know, someone in the Cloud Foundry orbit about the momentum of the project and you know how you're kind of viewing your opportunities as Cloud Credo as like part of this ecosystem.
Oh, it's amazing. We've been part of this for a long time, and it's just each time I think the momentum couldn't get greater, and we couldn't have more velocity and more interest. We do, so I'm tremendously excited. I can't believe how lucky we are to be in this industry at the moment. I really can't. It's just so incredible. I'm finding things currently of interest to me. A couple of things I wanted to mention. First one, the current kind of structured versus unstructured platforms debate is fascinating. And we've seen that over the past couple of years where we've had customers who have had a little look at Cloud Foundry, and then people internally have said, oh no, we need to build our own essentially container platform thing, and they've gone away, built some stuff, and then they've got a team of like 10 or 12 people trying to manage this Frankenstein's beast of a thing that looks like a rubbish Cloud Foundry, and then they come back to Cloud Foundry after that saying, actually, we just want to make use of things the community are building. So it's been a strange evolution where we've had people looking at Cloud Foundry, trying to build their own because you want to own everything, and then coming back to Cloud Foundry due to the strength of the ecosystem, the foundation, the diverse range of tech companies that have signed up for it, and the success of organizations that are using it. So that's been amazing to be part of that journey. And the other thing I wanted to raise that for me is personally fascinating is the question around, so you used to have a constraint within your organization that was deployment. So no one could get anything done because it took you, let's say, 6 months to get a server, and you couldn't deliver. And if you looked at your organization as a whole when you're trying to deliver applications, you couldn't get anything done. And Cloud Foundry removed that constraint. And it's really interesting to work with organizations where you completely remove the deployment constraint. And then what happens next? So what's the next constraint once you have your developers self-serving applications at huge scale that are almost immediately productionized and operationalized and these kind of things. So it's been amazing working with some organizations where you take that constraint away, and then what happens next? What's the next problem that you have to face when you can deploy so easily?
I mean, my observation, and I think this goes back to a lot of the DevOps tools as well, is that when you have something that has such a fundamental change that touches so many parts of the organization, there's an inordinate amount of social engineering that has to happen to really take full advantage of the transformation that's possible. And if you're not willing to do that, you're going to have a bad time, basically.
Yeah, that's what we've seen. That's why we've ended up doing, for better or for worse, a huge amount of coaching around Agile and XP, kind of the pivotal way, which we very much believe in as well. So Cloud Foundry, as you're mentioning, it's just a tool, and once you have that tool, it's a question of how do you wield it. And we found that really, really interesting with working with organizations. So now you can deploy as often as you want in a secure, reliable fashion. Should you do that? When should you do that? When shouldn't you do that? How do you take advantage of that? So that's been a really interesting journey. So that's where we come down to things like XP, lean startup. So if you're deploying all the time, but you're not working out whether or not those deployments and those new applications are actually helping you or making your organization deliver any more value, that's where you need the metrics, that way we need the data, the analytics, those kind of things, and that's where you need an organization that can take advantage of this amazing new capability that we're giving them.
I mean, I'm just nodding to everything you say, but I'm curious what your like, where have you seen people fall down, or where have you been shocked that someone was successful?
That's an interesting question. I've been shocked at how people have been very open to this change. So you have people who have been in a particular role for many, many years doing certain things, and what's been amazing is when you say, do you have a think about things in this way, maybe think about changing in this way, or if you did this thing, maybe you could learn faster as an organization. And I've been amazed how individuals are almost never the problem. If you say to an individual, do you think this might be a better way, do you want to try this, they're almost always receptive to it. But there does seem to be the other side of that, is some organizations seem to have a system whereby nobody knows where the problem is or where it lies, but there seems to be almost a group think that we can't change. So I think if you encourage enough individuals and seed enough kind of thoughts about learning and about changing and about iterating, you can do really well. But there does seem to be there's some friction, some tension against that in some organizations that you work with. But it never seems to be on an individual basis, as I say. It seems to just be a group think about, oh, we can't change this fast. I don't know if any of the rest of you, sorry, I'm just talking non-stop here. Obviously, I'm waking up as you're all going to sleep. So we're having this kind of changeover, passing the Cloud Foundry baton back over to London. So has anyone else had any kind of experiences of that nature with your organization where you're really trying to change them and, friction doing that?
I'm just, Colin, you're saying that, and I'm thinking of the Deming quote that Andrew used in his DevOps Days Minneapolis keynote when he said a bad system will beat a good person every time. I kind of wonder what do we use to beat that bad system?
That's a great question. I like to think that if you can provide evidence, you will win. So that's where, rather than telling organizations that, Cloud Foundry is, just telling them Cloud Foundry is the right way to do things, it's great, just trust me. It's always good, we always start with a small project. We always start with something small and demonstrate capability. So I think you can win by providing evidence. If you turn up and just say, we're going to do a huge transformation up front, that's not going to work. Whereas if you show, small, quick wins, you get more and more people on board, and then it becomes this snowball effect where people start seeing that as the bandwagon they can jump onto to be successful, and then you get more and more momentum. So I think that's how we've proven to be successful. Not the huge changes, but just going in and having those small wins, taking a few small projects until you gain trust and more trust and more trust and more trust, and then it just gains its own momentum and velocity.
I think it's also about all of the different silos that are within the organization also then have the opportunity to find their place in it, where you don't have an operations team that feels threatened by it. You don't have it seeming like it's lopsided, or there's an asymmetric view in the organization of how Cloud Foundry fits in.
I think that's an interesting point because across all the different people Pivotal's been working with, there's definitely organizations where it was sort of ops-led versus dev-led from the kind of adoption perspective, and they tend to get sort of like it's a different path, it's a different curve inside of those organizations. Like I feel like and the folks I've had for the last few years is a lot of operations, but when the operations team gets Cloud Foundry set up, but they haven't really done that kind of internal marketing to the developer team yet, then there's a tendency for the adoption curve to be slower. Where when the developers are the ones they're kind of pulling the platform in so that they could do their 12-factor continuous deployment microservice thing, then those have a different, seems to be more accelerated.
Does it make sense then when you're starting a project that does seem to be ops-led to try to insist on getting some of the development team buy-in early in the project?
I mean, I know from a Pivotal perspective that it changes the dynamics of adoption in a very meaningful way if you can give the developers a bit of a, like if you can connect them to the platform, right? And like it's super easy to say like a bunch of stuff, but I think if you can connect people to why, where they can like viscerally feel like they're going to be more productive and get them there quickly, then they're less likely to decide that, oh, we need to go build like a 18-month project with like a bunch of these things to kind of cobble something together.
Yeah, I mean, I try to almost get different silos within the organization, and I try to engage with those silos independently first. So the way that I'll speak to engineering would be aligning to the 12-factor story. But then whenever I'm talking to the operations side of the house, a lot of times you'll see, for example, they will almost always have concerns, at least in the customers that I talk to, they'll always have concerns around continuous deployment. I mean, they're incentivized to keep stable systems in uptime. And the way that they receive continuous deployment is that there will never be a happy state. Like it's just going to be a constant state of change. And that is introducing instability into all of my systems. So if you can kind of, enlighten them to the fact of, do you want to be incrementing, or do you want to be injecting, a few hours worth of change into your environment, or 6 months worth of change? Like which impact do you think carries less risk? More frequent, and then that resonates very well with the operations side of the house. So I tend to have two different ways of engaging the bigger picture conversation depending on which silo of the organization I'm talking to. It kind of brings everybody into the same.
I mean, this kind of goes back to sort of DevOps days talks I was giving circa 2010, but there's some interesting sociology around this notion of communities of practice and communities of interest. And development is a community of practice, and operations is a community of practice. And what you need to create is a community of interest that spans those two groups so that they have a common goal. And then there's a bunch of like interesting ideas around what this is an abstraction, but people call boundary objects, right? Like these trading zones where everyone can kind of look at one thing and agree, and this thing could be, going back to the point that you have a platform, right? Like your platform could be a bunch of people typing bash into the shell, or it could be this structured, very programmatic thing. But that platform is like how these things trade. And if you're constantly causing like problems for another person, which is what a lot of traditional deployments actually do, then you can't expect them to like love that idea that you're going to deploy all the time. So there's kind of like a leap of faith that has to happen to have something so like transformative to that process.
I'm laughing because 2 jobs ago we deployed on Friday afternoon a lot. It sometimes costs a bad time. Roll back, roll forward.
I also think the things you're discussing are they have to work together. So continuous delivery relies so heavily on a testing suite and your testing ability. So your devs have to be brought along for that ride of continuous delivery, because you have to have this amazing test suite so that you can assert that it's going to be okay when it gets to production.
Continuous delivery is predicated on continuous integration, right? If that is not solid, then continuous delivery is your worst nightmare.
And preferably some feedback loops as well. So, you have a baseline. That
part is also, I mean, we're saying here, so that for the operators to get on board with that minimizing of risk, you need to have a great test suite. But equally, you could be deploying, like continuous delivery is described as a fire hose because you're just firing out things of potential value. And you need to have those feedback loops in your organization so you can actually see whether or not what you're delivering is of value. So that's why I think it's continuous delivery almost poses a problem where you have to have dev and ops and the business brought in, or else it just doesn't work as a complete concept. So it ends up being, this kind of it's either an enabler or a disruptor, depending upon the way you look at it. So we're going to deploy 10 times a day. So how do we change the organization so it can do that? And if you address those problems, you start to hit some very interesting questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially very interesting questions about exactly which of your so-called microservices are actually writing to something else's data store. Like you start having to look at 12-factor again and saying, we probably can't be changing this schema over here and then not deploying that. Like you do start to have to pay attention to that.
Well, I would argue that at that point those are not microservices. What you did is you have a distributed application that's not a microservice, because it's by definition not decoupled.
That's why I said so-called.
So-called, allegedly.
So I want to take this entire conversation off on a tangent because we're talking a lot about organizational change, and I want to talk about something slightly more specific for just a moment. I want to talk about Lattice. I happen to be wearing a Lattice t-shirt, which I stole from Andrew while I was in America. I actually mugged him. He was subject to a British mugging while he was in Santa Clara.
Andrew is the one that I have to mug to get a Lattice t-shirt? Okay.
Yes,
I have a stash of them, actually. I could ship you some.
So Lattice has been evolving quickly lately, and I think Lattice is an amazing tool. So now we can also, in Lattice, you can deploy containers. You've been able to do that for a while, and it uses the components of Diego, which essentially at some point will become Cloud Foundry version 3. You can deploy those containers into Lattice, and you can scale them, schedule them. It's a great use of the Diego components. So what's happened in terms of new functionality in Lattice is the ability to run build packs and build droplets, which I'm really, really excited and enthusiastic about. So if you haven't played around in that functionality and haven't tried out the latest version of Lattice, I think it's 0.3, it is absolutely brilliant, and it's really helping from my side when I'm talking to customers about Cloud Foundry to start to show them how Cloud Foundry is not this opaque black box that can't be trusted. It's actually a set of components that have clear responsibilities, and how it's easy to build your own build packs, to like look at how the scheduling works and all these kind of things. And I think that really builds trust. The combination of it being open source, owned by a foundation, having great commercial releases like Pivotal as well around it. So all these kind of things, along with that ability to decompose it in projects like Lattice, has really helped to build up the trust in Cloud Foundry.
I think there's a lot more work to do there. The motivation, at least in my mind, is to expose the power and functionality of Cloud Foundry by decomposition, so that you give people that, like you said, right now Cloud Foundry in its entirety is a big pill to swallow, right? And so the thing that you get with a lot of these other projects, they're kind of smaller in scope, is what I call it has a really small mean time to dopamine, right? Like you can read a blog post, and in 15 minutes to an hour, you've got something working. You have your first container experiment, and there's dopamine flooding into your brain. Where Cloud Foundry, to start with open source Cloud Foundry right now, as a new person who's never done it, and kind of get to that first mean time to dopamine on open source Cloud Foundry is a bit of a slog compared to some of these other things. And so Lattice gives this opportunity to give people, with relatively small investment in time, the understanding of like the power of these container schedulers, all the things they're getting with the routing, the log aggregation. We got someone else from Asia. So I'm really just reinforcing your point that I think that there's a huge opportunity, and I hope, I'm optimistic we can evolve that even more and expose more interesting things about these components to people. But Lattice is definitely right there, and I hope people will grab it. I want to actually move to where Lattice itself is viewed as an interesting infrastructure component that people might use in other contexts, just to see what the experiments are.
I mean, I always have to say, BOSH Lite was pretty effective at getting me my initial shot of dopamine the first time I looked at it. I mean, it wasn't deploying the world. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. I was up in half an hour or whatever. If you just want to poke at the services, it's great.
So now we have
another thing that's coming to Lattice. Oh, sorry. Before we switch off Lattice, I just want to give everyone a heads up that the TCP routing work that GE has been helping with, that is pretty much, I think, in Lattice or about to be in the next build. So people that want to start, that's another one of the reasons we wanted to have Lattice out there to experiment and get stuff out there sooner than that was in the mainline and stable for. We wanted to have it be an experimentation place, and so that's while that's in incubation, we can still play around with it in Lattice and get it going. So I'm pretty excited to see what people do with that TCP router.
Absolutely. So in your arc of that narrative you were talking about, Colin, like what have you shown people, and kind of what's their impression, and how do you introduce Lattice, and then how does that lead into a conversation about Cloud Foundry or vice versa?
Yeah, it's interesting to, I think maybe it was you that had the original diagram that's been reused a few times, where you had the Death Star, which was Cloud Foundry, and the partially complete Death Star, which was Lattice. It's really interesting to look at those, look at the delta between the two and what's missing, and look at things around the what doesn't Lattice have, and is that of value to your organization? Because you start bringing in the functions of the cloud controller and the functions of the UAA and those kind of things, and they're actually really important. And when you start saying the things that the UAA can do in terms of integrating with your Active Directory, doing your SAML tokens, all that kind of stuff, it can do some really amazing things, OAuth 2 and everything integrated across the whole board. You start thinking, oh, that's actually of great value, and you start bringing in all the permissions and the roles and all the whole gamut that Cloud Foundry can do. and people start saying, yeah, actually, I do need all of that. I just hadn't thought about it, but the moment I start actually rolling this out in my organization, I do need it. So it's interesting to look at that and see whether or not you need the extra functionality. But it's great to just fire up, say to people, fire up Lattice, have a look at it, here, run X-ray on top of it, and visualize what's happening with the containers. And it really helps to demystify what's going on inside of, I'm going to call it a PaaS. I know you hate the term PaaS, but I'm still going to call Cloud Foundry a PaaS. I like the term. So demystify what's happening inside of there, because I think this is the bringing that second side to it, enabling ops people to have a view. We're doing lots of things around log search, ELK stack, having this view and the great metrics work that's happening inside of Pivotal and the APM stuff. Giving this kind of visibility and demystifying the platform, I think, is a large part of what we're going to be doing, in the future.
It's not so much that I hate the word PaaS, which it's true I do. It's that I just think that the PaaS, if there is such a thing, is a feature of Cloud Foundry, right? It's if you look at the full thing that's doing, especially if you consider BOSH, then what Cloud Foundry as a project aspires to do is give you the ability to run anything as a service, and one of those happens to be a platform, and that's a feature. And if you think about the evolution of that word, right, like the examples people hold up is Heroku. Heroku, quote unquote, by definition as a service means that it's running somewhere else, but how does that thing get deployed? It is by definition a service, it is by definition an application. How do you manage and operate that thing? And that is what Cloud Foundry actually aspires to do, is give you the ability to operate that thing, the ability to upgrade that thing, the ability to do all these other things. And so like the PaaS is just a little feature of the greater vision.
It's almost like the start of a sentence. So you've got platform as a service, but then that's being delivered as a platform, and then that's also, being delivered by Pivotal as a product. So you've got platform as a service, as a platform, as a product.
As software.
We can keep going. So it's good fun to see exactly. I think what we need to do is try and construct that so it forms rude words. I can't work out how we can do that, but there's going to be some way of making that work together to form something that's
we'll turn it into an art, and it'll be an art piece. We'll record it, it'll go viral. It'll be fine. So what else? We're about an hour in. Do we have any?
I only came here for some secrets. Who's got secrets for me?
Oh man.
I have an observation.
Waters is the keeper of the secrets.
Yeah, I noticed that every time Waters isn't here, nobody's drinking scotch. When Waters is here, it seems like everybody has there's something on the rocks.
Well, Waters is usually drinking tea. Maybe he just has that effect on people.
He's an enabler.
If I was drinking scotch at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, I think my team would have some things to worry about.
Or
don't get me wrong. That is the future vision for my company, but just not quite yet. I need to do a little more work yet.
You get the Liverpool office open?
I'm not sure quite what you mean by that, but I'm not going to say anything. That sounds very controversial.
One thing I saw that was interesting today, someone had this link. I'll actually put it in the chat. How much Java has had a surge on GitHub of the number of repos over the last several years, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Like a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Java was late to come over to GitHub from other places," or but if you, or that the Android is really dragging the numbers up and things. But if you look, it went from number 7 in 2008 to number 2 this year, right behind JavaScript. So that was pretty interesting. Like they attributed it to Java 8 being a very stable and feature-rich, platform for runtime. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think there's a bunch of things that are interesting on that chart. Like one is the collapse of Perl.
Yeah.
Because no one saw that coming.
Yeah. Shocking plot twist. I mean, it's not like, here's the other thing about that chart is, and it's obscuring, right? Like this is a lossy representation of what's actually happening because it's showing the rank over time. And as these, repos get added, like those are changing relative to each other in a way that's sort of hard to extract just from looking at this chart, right? So is it that these things, like, is there less Perl repos now? No, it's just that there's so many more of these other ones.
There's also been a trend. I mean, tomorrow is when the Google code repositories go read-only. Like, there's been a trend of people migrating old code bases to GitHub. So we got to take this with a large grain of kosher salt, because not every single thing that's being added to GitHub is necessarily new development.
So what is your takeaway, James?
I just thought it was interesting. Like when I used to work at Oracle, and at the time, it's right before I left to join the Cloud Foundry team. It was just feeling like the polyglot world was just exploding, and then people were leaving. The Google lawsuit was going on. The stuff with CloudBees and Kosuke, and that with Hudson and Jenkins was going on, and Oracle just felt like public enemy number one, and Java was just totally associated with that. And for me, it just seems like even though polyglot is still fantastic, you see JavaScript is way up there. There's still a lot of Ruby being done, and PHP, Python they're up there too. It just seems like I at the time thought Java was going to kind of drop off, and it hasn't. It's like it's really held its own in the enterprise. And if you look at a lot of places, it just seems like it's still like they're doing more Java development and less .NET development. And I found that a little surprising. But I think there's a lot of other stuff. I think you got mobile and stuff. But it's just like if you'd have told me like 4 or 5 years ago that the trend line would be up like that, like I would. Now, granted, I totally get the idea that some of these are not active code bases, or maybe they're represented by Android, or there's other things playing into it. But I think there's other data points that shows that the enterprise use of Java is still really high, and if not increasing.
I don't think that's even debatable, but the thing that I think is interesting to watch over the last 5-10 years that I've been involved is the explosion of language and the interest in language, and then all the kind of mature startups actually gravitating back to the JVM. Right.
Yeah, and even one step more granular, a lot of the other languages that were kind of under the spotlight that are JVM languages that kind of were positioned for a little while as being the Java++. I mean, Scala being the most famous of them. And then it seemed like that trend kind of dissipated back to the sustainability of Java. Where Java's kind of emerged with some of the advantages of those other languages coming into Java, but it hasn't really been one-upped by any of those projects.
I think it just comes down to what is the, it's kind of like a reliable, battle-tested way to build stuff, right? And you have the work's going on at Netflix, you have the work that's going on at Twitter, you have a bunch of these places where they started with this kind of polyglot mentality, and then they kind of gravitated back to that. There's a talk from Recon, I can't remember which year, I want to say 2012, might have been a different year, with Jeff Hodges talking about, and he's like a pretty good Twitter person, like he was a Twitter engineer that did a lot of work. He wrote some great essays about how to think about these problems, but his argument was that polyglot is basically BS, and that running at scale and trying to move fast, if you have to operate a bunch of different services that are all fundamentally different runtimes, then the overhead that you're putting on your organization to operate those is inordinate. And so that he was basically advocating that, and he wasn't saying it has to be Java, but that you collapse what you're going to do to a runtime, because you're going to have it's sort of a force multiplier on the operations and maintenance of the code base versus just like everyone does whatever they want and whatever. I'll
I
do
think
that.
that's an interesting point, but I think if you're taking that opinion, you're suggesting that the runtimes have a large amount of deviation, and obviously with what we're doing with Cloud Foundry, we're minimizing that deviation. So build packs do actually help to minimize that and say things run in a very common way. So maybe the operational overhead is lower, and then you can encourage polyglot development.
So what he was talking about was actually specific, and if you go look at some of his other work, and is like he's talking about like optimizing for performance at the scale of something like Twitter, and it's like if I need to go crawl around like strace or whatever, like through all these different runtimes to like figure out what's going on, it's a cognitive, like to page in and out all the context for these runtimes. Like he's not just talking about, oh, like I got it deployed and I can like restart a process, but it's like if I really want to dig into this and like understand what's going on in the runtime, then it's a higher cognitive load than if I just have one of them to think about.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Talk.
So I'm just saying I think that makes sense, but then I think a lot of companies use those kind of constraints or premature optimizations as an excuse to constrain their developers. So
yeah, a lot of companies do not need to be worried about the scale that Twitter was dealing with at the time.
Yeah, a lot of companies think they do, but they don't, and their actual constraints are getting code out the door, and that's where perhaps allowing more, more of freedom of choice to developers can actually really help move things along.
I think the other thing that people need to realize, and I think this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about some of the stuff Matt was saying with Allstate, is that software is inherently creative. It's a creative act, right? And if you can connect people to their own kind of intrinsic motivations to create, then if they're interested in doing things in a certain language, then facilitating them doing it in that language is an accelerant.
It's been interesting, just back to James's point around Java adoption, that I think my company's been running for about 3 years now. We've got a large number of our team are ex-Java developers, and it felt a couple of years ago that you couldn't admit to that. I've been a Java developer was a Java developer for a few years, and it felt that you couldn't admit to that, and you had to be doing things in Ruby and Go, and you had to be using the latest language. And it feels like now it's okay to say I use Java. It's okay, at a conference to put your hand up and say, yes, I can write these other languages, but I think Java 8 is actually pretty cool, and we're doing some nice stuff with lambdas. And it seems to have become more socially acceptable. It's now a bit of a badge of honor to say, yeah, I've got this many years experience in Java, whereas previously, like I say, a couple of years ago, I would have been less keen to admit to it.
We need like a 12-step program, sounds like. A 12-step program to 12-factor apps.
I do find it interesting that some people like actually identify as Java is one of those languages I still see people like say, what do you do? And they say, I'm a Java developer. They don't say I'm a software developer. They say I'm a Java developer. I've seen that a bunch. And then, so have you guys seen that with other languages where they say
absolutely. I think that like 90% of tech is tribalism and fashion.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
I mean, if you go to a lot of these kind of communities, like sometimes they get very very tribal, where there's like, we are this and they are that other thing. I see a lot of nodding. So I don't know if I have any secrets.
People want to feel like they belong to something, Andrew.
People want to feel like they belong to something. Absolutely. True story.
But please go on, tell us these secrets.
Well, the thing I was going to say that we should probably at least mention before we get off is two things. One is like there's a VMworld thing coming up that should have a fair bit of Cloud Foundry exposure, and then there's also an interesting thing that happened last week, which I think really just illustrates the kind of support that's coming behind this project right now, is the Microsoft blog post about the BOSH CPIs for Azure that went out. I don't know. I think it's comment worthy at the very least. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're calling it Preview 2, but we've got a couple people working with it. We've had quite a few customers actually interested in Microsoft Azure, putting Cloud Foundry on it, working with Pivotal commercially on that, and I think it's a pretty good match. So I'm really excited to see it make some good progress, and hopefully we'll have something to report over the next couple of weeks. This customer that I'm thinking of is a pretty, they want to put some load on it and really drive it. So we got a team working on that right now, and they're going to come out to Pivotal headquarters in the next couple of weeks to check it out and talk about it. So yeah, we're actually it's not just like some blog post that is like one of these things that just gets put out there, and we're actually really going to use it.
James, can I just ask you, I know it's 10 past midnight and I shouldn't be asking you deep questions and you're just about to fall asleep, but are we going to aim, with the Azure CPI, are we going to aim for complete feature parity with the AWS CPI and the other CPIs, or have there been any blockers we're aware of? Because sometimes when you build a CPI, you can do 90% of it, but it just can't do this other little thing, and that breaks a few things.
Yeah, there were some weird things that Dimitri was telling me. Dimitri is the BOSH product manager, and he's been working really closely with the team in Microsoft that's been working on this. And one of the things that Azure has I can't remember what the name of it. Someone could probably Google it right now or bang it while we're talking about it. But it's like the opposite of an availability zone. Like an availability zone is a little bit like the infrastructure, the server is kind of telling you like, hey, I'm gonna let you tell me exactly which label you want, and I'll put that someplace in where it's on different failure domain. And Azure actually has this thing called I'm trying to remember what it's called. I'm blanking on the name, but the idea is basically you tell it like, hey, all of these things that I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you a label for it, and those things need to be spread out as much as possible. Do your best. And so it's kind of flips it on its head. Instead of like the platform like declaring like what its physical things are, and you're kind of mapping into those things, you're telling their IaaS, hey, here's a set of things I want them like to have anti-affinity and spread out as much as possible. And when you like do your maintenance and things, like make sure you always have one of these things running. It was kind of an interest. So like that's something that like BOSH didn't have the idea of. So Dimitri was thinking about, should we expose that thing in BOSH somehow or not? So that was one thing. He's been working on them to really drive out as much BOSH functionality as possible. So I'm not aware of any major blockers. Like there's always some infrastructure specific things like S3. Or I'm sorry, not S3, but the EBS volumes can be encrypted in the Amazon CPI, right? So there's these cloud properties. We can tell the Amazon ELBs when certain jobs come up and add them to the load balancer. So those are some things around the edges. I'd be surprised if they've gotten done yet, Colin. But if we get a couple big customers on there really using it, I think those things will just come naturally.
I don't know if there's any secrets. The secret is chop wood, carry water.
Hey, Andrew, when are you coming up to San Francisco?
For
For
VMworld,
VMworld, I assume. So when do you get here?
I have not made my flights, but I'm eyeballing.
Of course you haven't. Do you have
What's that?
Do you have a hotel reservation?
Yeah, I got one when I made yours.
Do you know that the place that this conference is like super close to the hotel I'm actually at right now, and we're moving to a farther away hotel?
I don't know. I don't control everything in the world. It is what it is.
It's probably fine.
Probably fine. This is fine. Yeah, I'm excited for VMworld. I have like a brutal schedule to give a bunch of stocks and stuff, but
I saw that you're giving like 800 talks on one day. That's going to be pretty impressive.
yeah, I don't know how that got scheduled that way. And one of them is only like 15 minutes, so it shouldn't be bad. But
It should be pretty cool.
I think we could probably give a little bit of I wouldn't say a secret, I'd say more of a hint, Andrew, that the Pivotal is going to have a presence there and doing something neat with VMware. I think that's more of a hint.
There is a potentially industry-changing thing that could happen. I think it has potential. I don't know. We'll see.
So yeah, that's just a little bit of a hint. It's not quite a secret. Pay attention though.
Is this thing happening during one of Andrew's talks or one of the other events?
No, it's actually. I think it'll be announced by the VMware guys, right?
Yeah, it has potential to be in the spotlight. Let's put it that way.
We'll watch for
and
it.
Bridget, once you're a few more minutes pass by, I guess it's after midnight Pacific time. So once we go off air, you might be able to be let in on the secret.
I think
Can I just say, from a community perspective here, you can't just sit there having a little pivotal party, not telling us what the secrets are. This is secrets. This is not teasers. You can't just turn up and tease us all and say, "Hey, we know all the things." You just deliver here.
I don't know all the things yet.
So let's just imagine in a world where someone at VMware
In a world.
let's say they made like an actual scale-out cloud platform. And then let's say like you could probably run Pivotal Cloud Foundry on it. And then like see what happens. It can happen.
That sounds pretty cool.
I mean, I think actually all that stuff's sort of out there. The crazy thing actually has more to do with the business side. Let's leave it like that.
An air of mystery on the secrets tonight, Andrew.
I mean, that's the other thing is like, Waters can do like cowboy water stuff, but like I don't know what I should tell people. So,
That's a good place to leave it. It leaves everyone going, "Ooh, we better be watching these live keynotes out of VMworld."
Well, unless someone wants to get in a last word, I think we'll call it on the 80-minute mark.
This was awesome. What a show.
This is super great, and I'm in San Francisco for the next 2 weeks. Yay! So I hope I see a lot of people.
So
I will see you tomorrow.
I think this is the first time where we had Europe and Asia on the same show.
Yeah, this was truly global. This one.
The sun never sets. We'll just leave it with that.
All right.